Hi, it's Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drill Down. Well, political violence and something called righteous crime is on the rise. What's causing it? Who's fueling it? We're going to unpack that today on the Drill Down with the co-host of this program, Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
I'm excellent. I'm very excited. Like my inner social deviant is like tickled at the idea of the concept of righteous crime. You have to explain to me what that is, but I'm here for it.
Yeah. Well, two big news stories this week we're going to unpack. The first, of course, is yet another assassination attempt on Donald Trump that just took place. And, of course, the investigation and now the indictment of the Southern Poverty Law Center, the accusation being that they poured millions of dollars into violent racist groups to basically encourage them in their activities so they could fundraise off of it. And these two events, we're going to argue, are connected in a very, very fundamental way. And I'm going to get to righteous crime in just a minute. But tell me a little bit about what you think they might have in common. I mean, they seem like they're totally different, but they're fused together in a very real way.
Well, I think what we're seeing, unfortunately, is a rise in a trend that's been, I think, largely ignored. So I think it's good that we get a chance to talk about it today, of one political ideology, one political kind of identity. The left, quite frankly, is increasingly linked to violence or kind of hateful rhetoric. And I would say that's what those have in common. The president's would-be assassin released a manifesto, which we'll hear from courtesy of 60 Minutes in a little bit. And so obviously, like his motives are not unclear, despite what Barack Obama may say on Twitter. And you also have like the Southern Poverty Law Center, it's a left-leaning nonprofit group who is apparently responsible for most of the funding for the KKK for the last decade plus. So that's what I think they have in common. You have the people on the left funding, supporting, or otherwise facilitating hate and violence towards people on the other side.
Yeah, encouraging it. So this is, of course, a subject of dispute. You mentioned Barack Obama's comments that we don't really know the motives of this attempted assassin, which is pretty clear. He issued something called a manifesto that had come out before.
If only we had
the internet.
Some clues as to what motivated this man to do this.
Exactly. But there's a big debate going on about where is political violence coming from in America? Who's responsible? Let's listen to Senator Schmidt from Missouri. This is his statement after the attempt on Donald Trump. This is clip 5.
25% of those who describe themselves as very liberal believe political violence is legitimate, compared to 3% of people who identify as very conservative. That's 3% too many. But let's not pretend it's the same thing. Let's also not pretend that it's not a serious problem that 55% of those on the left believe it is at least somewhat justified to assassinate President Trump. This is not a both sides thing.
And he's right. And by the way, he's not the only one that's saying this. There's a new study that I think adds some teeth to, or the meat on the bone of the kind of the skeletal framework he's providing. And this just anecdotally makes sense, right? Obviously, there's been multiple assassination attempts on Donald Trump. There was the Charlie Kirk assassination last year. And then you obviously have the Luigi Mangione shooting of Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO, a shooting that, by the way, was championed in many respects by people on the left. They talk about righteous crime. It seemed justifiable because of whatever healthcare related greed or social ills are falling there. And so it kind of got us thinking that, well, it does seem like there's a rise in violence on the left. And turns out a group called the Center for Strategic and International Studies agrees. They put out a study in September of last year, Peter Schweizer, and they said, among other things, that the number of terrorist incidents involving left-wing extremists in 2025 had it on the pace to be the most violent year in more than 3 decades for people on the left. And you've got reasons why their analysis may be even kind of underreporting the amount of violence on the left. But they say the increase in left-wing attacks is noticeable because right-wing perpetrators have sharply declined. But basically, the left is more violent, this report says, than any time in the last 3 decades.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this is, of course, there are right-wing political attacks that have occurred. You know, the militia movement in the 1990s, and you had some incidents. You had that attack against Hispanics in Texas. I think it was last year, the year before. It was at Walmart, I believe. So those things do happen. But what I think is different, and I think what Senator Schmidt's statistics show, by the way, he's not pulling those numbers out of his ass. Those are real numbers, real figures from surveys. The difference is that the violence on the right is not embraced righteously by people on the right, at least anybody that has any kind of voice. You might have some nut job who has 12 followers on Twitter, but you don't have people with podcasts. You don't people with broadcasting agreements with large platforms who are saying, I'm glad that guy went and shot those Hispanics in Texas. What you do see on the left-wing violence, however, is kind of excuse making, right? Kind of endorsing the fact that this happened. As Senator Schmidt pointed out, people on the left believe that it's okay potentially to assassinate Trump. And you have to unpack why is that. And the reason is they fundamentally believe that they are correct and right and true. And anybody that disagrees with them is wrong. And not only wrong, evil. And that is a classic definition of narcissism. And I think social media has brought it out, but particularly on the left, you see the embrace and sort of almost the endorsement or the sort of joking nature, and we're going to talk about that more in a minute, of the kind of crime and violence that's taking place.
Look, we love everybody, but just to be very clear, the left is evil, they're violent, and narcissists. So that's what...
Well, I'm not saying all the leftists, but I'm saying people that do engage in this, it's classic narcissistic behavior.
Yeah.
I am justified in doing something because I am good. If somebody else does the same thing, it's bad. So this is something that came up in a conversation with Hassan Piker, who is an influencer. He's got a huge following.
He's having a moment.
Yeah, he's having a moment. He went on with an editor of the New York Times, and they discussed not assassinations, but you can see where the seed of this develops. What they believe are good examples of crime that is acceptable or righteous. Listen to clip number 2.
Would you steal from Whole Foods?
You want to go first? Well,
right, guys?
I'm pro stealing from big corporations because, they steal quite a bit more from their own workers. However, one thing that might even help your ethical dilemma is the fact that the automated process that they designed, these companies know will increase shrink, right? So it's actually factored in. The lemons that you stole are factored into the bottom line of these mega corporations regardless, and they still end up having increased profit margins because they no longer have to pay the cashiers that they used to hire, as opposed to this automated system, knowing full well that people are still going to be able to still steal a lot more efficiently, as a matter of fact, through the automated process.
And let me just add, by the way, because we're going to talk a little bit more about Mr. Piker. Just imagine if he had an employee that works for his podcast who thinks he's underpaid and he stole from Hassan Piker. He certainly wouldn't agree with it. He wouldn't like it. This is what happens when you assume that the goodness and righteousness is all with me and anybody else is wrong. You get this sort of justification for criminal behavior as good. And here you have a New York Times editor along with Hassan Piker cheering it, but it's even worse than that when it comes to him.
Well, and gets back to the whole, when you compete in the attention economy, then your incentive is to say things that are going to generate you a lot of attention. And Hassan Piker's been very successful at that. In March of 2025, he was talking about Rick Scott. And he said, if you care about Medicare or Medicaid fraud, you would kill Rick Scott, in response to reports of fraud being associated with, what he's done before.
So he's talking about killing a U.S. senator.
Well, it is at least tangentially adjacent referencing it.
Doesn't he say kill?
The word kill, Rick Scott, does come out of his mouth. He also says that he described the previously mentioned healthcare murder of Brian Thompson as a social murder. And
what's a social murder as opposed to a murder?
I mean, what's a righteous crime? Right. And then I would say he's also apparently said, let the streets soak in landlords' red capitalist blood. So, these are things that people say. And to your point, Hassan Piker, not in addition to being a very popular, let's call it left wing, let's just say it's not, I don't think, unfair to say he's representative of a class of people on the left.
Yeah, he is. And again, you can go online. You can find crazy people saying all kinds of things. What's different about Piker is how he really actually has a voice now within the Democratic Party. And
this is the key.
Yeah, and people are running to him. So this is not a voice in the wilderness, trying to gin up. This is not Nick Fuentes trying to say outrageous things and everybody in the Republican Party saying, I don't want to have anything to do with him. Hassan Piker has been campaigning with a progressive Democratic candidate who's trying to win the nomination in Michigan for the Senate seat. He was a big supporter of Zohan Mandami. He attended his election watch party, which of course was an invitation-only watch party. On his podcast, where he has said these outrageous things, prominent progressives like AOC, Representative Ro Khanna, show up and say, yeah, we'll sit down and do an interview with this guy. It would be like Ted Cruz sitting down with Nick Fuentes. I will say there are Democrats who have called him out for this. These are Democrats, by and large, you haven't heard of. Congresswoman Haley Stevens, who's running for that Senate seat.
You're not rewarded within the party for being critical of people like this.
That's right. The other person I would say who declined to go on the podcast would be Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. So we should give him credit for that. But the bottom line is a guy who is calling for killing U.S. senators, who is normalizing other criminal conduct and saying not only is it something we shouldn't enforce, it's actually a good thing, is being embraced by prominent political figures.
Well, and I would say that the point we're trying to make is you just had another attempt to kill the current president of the United States.
Right.
And so what we're saying is this is not just an isolated incident. There are a lot of different, I think, social and intellectual kind of roots that are connected to this rise in violence on the left. And it's odd that it's not just happening in the new left, the younger people. There are mainstream examples of these same sentiments being espoused. So we're going to play a clip for you with Jimmy Kimmel. Now, I didn't catch this, but that happened before the White House Correspondents' Dinner, but I guess they normally have a comedian, and so they chose not to have one. So Jimmy Kimmel, he who was recently suspended from ABC for making light of Charlie Kirk's assassination, does a kind of a fake monologue and makes a joke, and then about Melania Trump appearing to have a glow like a widow. And then, of course, there's this assassination attempt, and then so Melania Trump comes out and says, hey, that was so wrong. Jimmy Kimmel's violence is part of the problem. Yeah. And then so here, the Monday after, there was another assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and the First Lady says, hey, I take exception to your comments about my husband and our family. Here's what Jimmy Kimmel on ABC, which is owned by Disney, it's like a mainstream thing. Here's how he addressed it.
As you know, they had to cancel the White House Correspondents' Dinner in Washington on Saturday night after a man with multiple guns and knives crashed the party and may have shot a Secret Service officer. Fortunately, the guy was wearing a bulletproof vest and is okay. They're not sure exactly what happened, but they got the guy. He was charged today. No one was hurt, thank goodness. A lot of people were shaken up on a night that is supposed to be lighthearted. 5 nights ago, it was a pretend roast. I said, our First Lady Melania is here. Look at her, so beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow, which obviously was a joke about their age difference and the look of joy we see on her face every time they're together. It was a very light roast joke about the fact that he's almost 80 and she's younger than I am. It was not, by any stretch of the definition, a call to assassination, and they know that. I've been very vocal for many years speaking out against gun violence in particular, but I understand that the First Lady had a stressful experience over the weekend, and probably every weekend is pretty stressful in that house.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing on so many levels here is, first of all, he doesn't give anything about the motive, right, of the person. He just, this guy kind of shows up with guns, and then he characterizes it as gun violence, as if the guns sort of were perpetuating this, and no sense of remorse that he's literally trying to get yucks by talking about the president of the United States dying. He claims it wasn't for assassination. He's just dying of old age. This is what he's getting yucks for. And people in the audience were laughing about it. Again, it's remarkable the mindset that they have adopted because they have convinced themselves that their political opponent, which happens to be Donald Trump, is this evil, vile person. And Jimmy Kimmel is not that far removed from those 25% of people on the left who think there might be reasons to assassinate this guy.
You may find this hard to believe, Peter Schweizer, but I actually am not a stranger to making attempts at jokes that offend people.
No.
I know. It has happened to me.
Shocking.
You know, a couple of strange relationships later, you know, you kind of just get past it. but the point of
pushing those boundaries.
But the point of it is, like, that is among the most callous and insincere efforts to rationalize. No one believes you, Jimmy Kimmel. I'm sorry. You know, like, I like a good joke, right? And if it's on the nose, like, I'm here for it. Don't pretend that expectant widow joke is an age joke. Right. You can't make an age joke, call somebody a widow, when there's been multiple assassination attempts. Right. The man's literally been shot. Right. And almost was killed. Right. So no one's buying it. So that happened. Like, on ABC, you called the wife of a man who's been shot. She got the glow of expected widow 2 days before there was another assassination attempt. I'm sorry. I think we could do a little bit better in terms of, let's just own the role that your rhetoric plays. But he is not alone. That's not the only mainstream network to have an issue. Literally the day after the assassination attempt, here is 60 Minutes. Norah O'Donnell, hey, Mr. President, we're so sorry this thing has happened to you again. Is that what she said? No, she chooses, Peter Schweizer, to platform the actual man and his ideology. Listen to what she said to President Trump.
The thing that's remarkable to me about this, just imagine if somebody had tried to assassinate Barack Obama and they had written a racist manifesto, you know, all the classic racist tropes about, you know, he looks like a monkey or all that kind of. Could you imagine 60 Minutes sitting around Barack Obama? Now, the attempted assassin said you look like a monkey. Would you? I mean, it's absurd. It's patently absurd. And this is giving voice and encouraging the kind of narcissists that we're talking about. This guy that tried to do this to Trump is looking for attention. He's looking for a way to be a hero. And now 60 Minutes is fueling that. By putting this stuff out in the airwaves.
Yeah, it legitimizes it, is what it does.
Exactly.
Right? Because you are platforming a person who just attempted to assassinate the president of the United States on national television.
60 Minutes would never say somebody accused you of being a pedophile in an interview, except for the fact that somebody tried to kill him. And that encourages this kind of behavior. And
to your point, they wouldn't have done it with a racist ideology for Barack Obama because they would have rejected the premise under which it was. And
absolutely.
And so what it shows you is they clearly chose not to reject it.
Right.
And they chose to confront him with it and expose that ideology, that perspective to a national television audience. It's interesting that you mentioned Barack Obama. We talked about him earlier. This just adding to the level, like, ridiculous. Here's what it reminds me of, Peter Schweizer. It reminds me of the Joe Biden cognitive decline story. It was so obvious for everyone to see, but everyone else pretended that it wasn't a thing. Yeah. And they ignored it or they denied it. And I feel like that's what's happening now with this leftist violence. And I mean, like, this is Barack Obama's tweet probably at the same time Norah O'Donnell's interviewing Donald Trump, because it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon the next day. Yeah. So it's like, it's been a whole day. And Barack Obama starts off his tweet with, although we don't yet have the details about the motives behind last night's shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Yes, we do.
Like, Norah O'Donnell's literally reading to Donald Trump the motives at the same time. So it speaks to, it's either intentional ignorance or you're pretending it's not been out there. Right. Just like they did with the other national scandal. And here's where it gets worse. Is a term the millennials like to use. You learn this when you offend people and you have estranged relationships and you have to go to counseling. And you learn this term called gaslighting. You familiar with it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Who do we think is responsible for the violence and the dangerous atmosphere around Donald Trump? Some people would say it's the people on the left. You just heard the statistics.
The people actually trying to shoot the guns.
Yeah,
you would think.
Not according to Chuck Todd and Chris Cillizza. Listen to clip 4. Listen to what they say is responsible for this increase in feeling less safe.
I'm not going to any more events where Trump's at them. I don't feel safe. Wherever Donald Trump
Chaos follows him.
Chaos follows him. And you are less safe, right? If you decide to go into his orbit, you have become less safe. He does not care about your safety. He's not going to protect you if you go into his orbit, because he's always going to protect himself first. He's more likely to throw you under the bus. He's more likely to have you be the target of Iranian assassins if you're John Bolton or Mike Pompeo. And he's going to pull any sort of federal support, right? You know, I think about when somebody using Donald Trump's words and actions targeted me and a bunch of other members of the press. You know who I didn't hear from?
Donald Trump.
Right. So the guy doesn't care when people commit violence in his name. He only cares when the violence is committed against him, and he does not see that he is a contributor to the atmospherics of the world we're living in, right?
A contributor to the atmosphere. You know what this clip sounds like? This is classic blaming the victim. This reminds me of the 60s and 70s, and you probably still hear it sometimes today, where a woman gets raped and somebody steps up. It's usually an old guy who says, well, look at the dress she was wearing. Look how she was flirting with that guy. She was kind of asking for it. Classic blaming the victim. And that is what Chuck Todd is doing here. According to some reports, Secret Service agents aren't even being paid as they are protecting the president. One agent actually took a bullet while he was protecting the president. Fortunately, he was wearing a bulletproof vest. This is why we are going to continue to see more left-wing violence, because in sort of hidden wink ways, they are legitimizing it. They're being heard on 60 Minutes. Excuses are being made. People are saying, well, too bad Trump didn't die. And this relates to the second part of what we wanted to discuss today, which was the Southern Poverty Law Center. This is an amazing story that broke. The Attorney General has announced that they are charging them with several criminal offenses, one of which is that the Southern Poverty Law Center was misusing funds they raised to fight the Klan by sending money to the Klan, millions of dollars worth, because the Justice Department is saying because they wanted them to fuel KKK activity, other extremist activity, because it helped them raise money.
And people are only willing, I think they're sort of underreacting to that. But I mean, to your point, if there was a right-wing group that had funded this sort of bizarre hate, it just seems like it would be leading the news everywhere. So and to your point, what do they have in common? They both have one side seems to be creating and perpetuating an atmosphere of making people less safe. And as you said, the person who started the Southern Poverty Law Center, they sort of admitted a few years ago, this is kind of part of their business model. Yeah.
So this is a really interesting piece. I'm giving the sourcing because I think it's important. Bob Moser, who worked at the Southern Poverty Law Center, wrote a piece in the New Yorker. Why is that important? The New Yorker is hardly hostile to the Southern Poverty Law Center, but he ran a story in 2019 where he quotes Morris Dees, who was the co-founder and up until 2019 was also still running the Southern Poverty Law Center. And he was asked about how they operate and what they do. And what Dees, the co-founder of SPLC, said, quote, "We just run our business like a business. Whether you're selling cakes or causes, it's all the same." Which means, of course, you want to create demand for your services. One of the ways you do that is you need a Klan attack now and again, because that allows you to raise a lot of money. And this is part of the agenda. And even the people that were working at the Southern Poverty Law Center recognized this and saw this. One of the things the guy quotes in this article is that the employees at the Southern Poverty Law Center would say, quote, "The SPLC, making hate pay."
So I would actually connect that to create a demand for your services. Is that not what, in many ways, the legacy media is doing? They're trying to continue to point out that Donald Trump is this threat. Yeah. It's not the people causing actual violence.
Right.
I mean, go back to that Chuck Todd. You used the word narcissism. Yeah. Chuck Todd's response to that is the definition of I'm upset. Forget the fact that he keeps getting shot at.
Chuck Todd, nobody wants to shoot you. Okay?
I don't feel
They're there
safe.
to shoot Trump. They're not there to shoot you.
And by the way, as an aside, Chuck Todd will tell anybody that listens he's a giant University of Miami football fan because he went to the University of Miami in college.
Right.
You know what's not safe? University of Miami college football games when he went there. So don't tell me that when you're in a ballroom with security guards and everything else, it's absurd.
Yeah.
So but but they have to. They can't admit. The left is kind of being violent because he's not useful to his constituency. The Southern Poverty Law Center is not useful to its constituency unless they tell you that this threat exists. And so whether it's actually paying the threat, as the Southern Poverty Law Center did, or just pretending that the threat is something other than itself, which is what these media types are doing, that's the same business model. And it is. And it's causing a fundamental shift in the ideology, which is what Eric Schmidt spoke about in the first clip we played.
Yeah. Bottom line is, if Donald Trump is not a Nazi, and most Americans recognize that he's not a Nazi, if his followers are not stormtroopers trying to impose a racist Klan-like ideology on the United States, SPLC is basically out of business. The mainstream media has very little to report on, very little to drive ratings. So they need this to be true. And how do you make it true? You make it true by ginning up some of these attacks, right? By funding these operations and by continuing to fuel nut jobs who are calling him a Nazi. And by the way, let's just be clear. I mean, you got guys like Bruce Springsteen who's out there saying that Donald Trump is a Nazi. And then after the assassination saying our thoughts and prayers are thankful that Trump didn't die. I mean, come on, really, give me a break. I mean, either he's a Nazi or, he's not. I mean, would anybody say Himmler, he's a Nazi? Oh, I'm so glad he survived that assassination attempt. My thoughts and prayers are with Himmler's family. Of course they wouldn't. So it's disingenuous to its core. That's the bottom line. And that's what I think people have to understand. They are creating a demand for their services. It's classic cronyism. We talk about it among politicians, members of Congress, presidents, everybody. It's the same thing with the news media, and it's the same thing with these nonprofit organizations.
Also, don't forget that former FBI director James Comey had that really weird social media post where he said, posted the picture of 8647, which he's actually just been re-indicted for. So the left continues to have this weird pattern of being adjacent to violent rhetoric. It is literally filtering down to the culture where you're seeing a shift in terms of the ideology of what you think is correct. If people are willing to steal from corporations because they think, well, the corporation is stealing from you, a certain number, a higher percentage of people ever think that violence is justified. And oh, by the way, you saw the most violent year ever in terms of people on the left, according to this study. So, I mean, it's all connected, and it's one of the reasons why it's important. Unlike Joe Biden's cognitive decline, people need to talk about it and cover it and be honest about it in real time.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think until we deal with these issues, it's only going to get worse. I think we're going to see more assassination attempts. We're going to see not just against the president, probably against people in the cabinet, et cetera. So we're going to keep monitoring this as we always do. We appreciate you taking the time to listen to this podcast. We know your time is valuable. Please go to thedrilldown.com. You can look at the research, and also please consider subscribing to this podcast. Thanks again. Until next time.